The evolution of NPCs in 1980s video games, a decade of innovation and development. The 1980s marked a transformative era in the video game industry, with the evolution of non-player characters, NPCs, playing a pivotal role in this transition. At the beginning of the decade, NPCs were rudimentary, primarily serving as functional elements within the game's mechanics. By the end of the 1980s, they had evolved into more complex figures, contributing significantly to narrative depth, gameplay complexity, and player engagement. Early 1980s, the foundations of NPC interaction. In the early 1980s, the concept of NPCs was in its nascent stages. Games like Zork, 1980, and Wizardry, 1981, were among the pioneers in this regard. Zork, a text-based adventure game, utilized NPCs to enhance its narrative depth, albeit through primitive interactions. These characters, described vividly through text, offered clues and obstacles, engaging players in a rudimentary form of storytelling. Wizardry, on the other hand, introduced NPCs in a role-playing game, RPG, setting, where interactions, although limited, included functions like trading and providing information. Arcade games of this era, such as Donkey Kong, 1981, and Frogger, 1981, demonstrated another aspect of NPC development. In Donkey Kong, the titular Donkey Kong was central to the game's narrative and challenge, though its interactions were more in line with obstacles than the nuanced characters seen in later years. Frogger used animals and hazards as integral gameplay elements, further exemplifying the use of NPCs as functional rather than narrative components. Mid-1980s, increasing complexity and narrative integration. As the decade progressed, the mid-1980s witnessed a gradual increase in the complexity and narrative integration of NPCs. The King's Quest series, beginning in 1984, exemplified this trend. These adventure games featured a variety of NPCs, ranging from mythical creatures to fellow humans, each contributing to intricate quests and puzzles. The interactions with these characters were essential for advancing the narrative and completing the game's challenges. Super Mario Bros., 1985, and The Legend of Zelda, 1986, further showcased the evolving role of NPCs. In Super Mario Bros., the enemy characters, though not deeply interactive, were critical to the game's platforming challenges and world building. The Legend of Zelda introduced a world rich with NPCs, from simple shopkeepers to complex characters integral to the storyline, reflecting a growing emphasis on world building and narrative complexity. Late 1980s, the emergence of dynamic and interactive NPCs. By the late 1980s, NPCs had become markedly more dynamic and interactive. This period saw the release of games like Maniac Mansion, 1987, and Prince of Persia, 1989, where NPCs were not only part of the game's environment but also key to progressing the narrative and influencing the player's experience. Maniac Mansion featured a cast of eccentric characters, each with unique personalities and roles within the game's narrative. This point-and-click adventure game highlighted how NPCs could add humor, challenge, and depth to the gameplay experience. Prince of Persia, with its fluid, realistic animation, brought a new dimension to NPC interactions, making the encounters with palace guards and other characters more engaging and lifelike. Conclusion? The 1980s were a decade of significant growth and innovation in the realm of video game NPCs. From the text-based adventures and basic functional roles of the early 1980s to the more dynamic and integral characters of the late 1980s, NPCs underwent a remarkable transformation. This evolution not only enhanced the gaming experience but also laid the foundation for the sophisticated and interactive NPCs that would become a staple in the video game narratives of the future. As technology advanced, so did the potential for NPCs to contribute meaningfully to storytelling, gameplay mechanics, and player immersion, a trend that would continue to evolve and shape the gaming industry in the decades to follow.